All right, so I want to thank everyone for being here for my informative speech. I'm Dan McCroskey, and just a little bit of a background. I've worked over 30 years on military aircraft as well as working with an electronics company building LCD displays. It's really working with the aircraft and the electronics and seeing new technology has really enthralled me. I really enjoy it. So I love air and space technology. It's just truly wonderful. So today we're going to be talking about the creation of NASA and its direct impact of inventions on our lives. So one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. This was quoted from Neil Armstrong on his landing on the moon back in 1969. And this statement really has a very profound impact. And as we discuss all these different items and inventions and technologies, you'll kind of get a grasp of that. So as we look at items that were developed for NASA, we're going to look at how NASA was created. We're also going to do a little bit of myth busting, and then we're also going to look at some of the NASA's ingenuity. So I want you to each think of an item that is simple, small, maybe used in your everyday lives that you think that, hey, I think I know that this was used by NASA years ago, and this is something that we use today. And I want you to keep it to yourself, and later on we'll go around the room and ask people. But first of all, why was NASA established? So in 1957, Russia launched Sputnik 1. It had a unique mission, but ultimately what it did is it created a space race between the United States and the Soviet Union. So at this point in time, the United States, we were behind schedule. We were behind the Russians, and we had to do everything we could to catch up. So in 1958, President Eisenhower, he had signed the Space Act, which created NASA, and trying to give them kind of a foothold, kind of a way of competing with Russia. So it wasn't just bang, you're NASA, you're created. It took time to get funding. It was going to be a civilian operation. And then the Army actually owned all the ballistic programs, and so they had to get that all transferred. So let's take a look at a couple of the pre-NASA programs. The first one's going to be in 1958. This is Pioneer 1. This was a joint venture between NASA and the Army. And then this was a satellite that was going to check for radiation between the Earth and the Moon. Ultimately, the mission was a failure because there was a mechanical issue that caused a fault within 43 minutes after launch. The next pre-NASA program was the Project Mercury. And this was the United States' first manned program. Out of 500 plus men interviewed, only 7 of them were selected to be America's first astronauts. So remember, as I said earlier, Russia started the space race and they were ahead of NASA. So what was going on was that NASA was under a lot of pressure because they were behind. They were pressure from the president all the way down to the civilian public. And it was viewed as anything that Russia did was considered counterproductive to everything and all the beliefs that the United States had. So this space race was extremely important. So with that being said, let's go in a little bit of myth busting time. We're going to talk about some of the items that we think were created for NASA, but they really weren't. So does anybody think of anything that they think was created for NASA? Yes?
Tinfoil.
Tinfoil? We'll have to research that one. That one's not part of my presentation, but we'll research it. Anything others? Yes?
Tang.
Tang? I know for a fact Tang was made before NASA was actually established. Yes?
Velcro.
Velcro?
Space ice cream.
It's part of my briefing, so we'll get into that one. Any others? Yes?
Space ice cream.
Space ice cream? I would say that was also created by NASA, and that'll be covered in part of our briefing. Yes?
Duct tape.
Duct tape? That's part of my briefing too, and so we'll get to that one. All right? Nothing? Okay. So let's get on into it. So in 1943, Miss Vesta Stout, she worked in an ammunition factory, and she was seeing how all the packages were being shipped to the troops and had an idea. And her idea, she wrote a letter to President Roosevelt with these drawings and plans, and he liked it so much that they contracted Johnson & Johnson to actually come out with duct tape. So duct tape was actually created in 1943 before NASA was established. Another item, George Mistel, He was a Swiss engineer. He was taking his dog for a walk and noticed that these burrs were stuck in his fur. So pretty intrigued, being an engineer, he wanted to see why this was happening. So he did some investigating. He figured out, now I know how this works. And he created a process that created the hook and loom, which we know today as being Velcro. So Velcro was actually created in 1948. And kind of a side note was when NASA actually started using Velcro, the previous year, the patent on Velcro was actually expiring worldwide so that it could be freely made. So let's go in time just a little bit. 1967, Paul Fisher. So Paul Fisher, his company actually helped NASA save face. And how they did that was that NASA had enlisted the contracting skills of a company to build mechanical pencils to go into space. Unfortunately, these mechanical pencils were $1,300 a piece. So I imagine 1967, that's a pretty big scandal for cost. Well, Mr. Fisher and his company had developed the space pen, what we know today as the space pen. It can write not only in a weightless environment, but also can write underwater and other harsh environments. So the space pen not only was used by NASA, but also was used by Russia. And they only sold the pens for $6 a piece at the time.
Weren't pencils cheaper?
Pencils were cheaper, yes. So also another creation back in after NASA was developed was by Jack Kilby. He was an engineer with Texas Instruments, and his design had actually was part of the Apollo-Soyuz project, and it was the portable hand calculator. Calculators back then were big, bulky, and had to be plugged in. So his invention, the first calculator, was pretty significant because now, instead of everything done by hand by the astronauts, they now can do a lot of it with the calculators in space.
I didn't know that.
So kind of going back, remember I said Russia was leading the space race. So with that being said, their early success required them to use independent innovations from people. They had to have teamwork to work with other companies and other countries to help them be successful to catch Russia. And so then it also required them to have some ingenuity on their own. So with that being said, you got to remember back in the 1960s, there was really no PCs. Everything was trial and error. But they had two important goals. First one was safety, second one was comfort. And we're going to cover a couple items in each one of those categories. So when we're talking about safety, we're going to cover food and water. You got to remember on spaceships, the space and the weight is very limited on spacecraft, but astronauts always need food and water, right? So for usable drinking water, they developed a microfiltration system. And how many of you have microfiltration systems in your house for purifying water? Okay. So that system was actually developed by NASA, and it's later something that we use. It's so sophisticated now, they can actually take their own astronauts' urine and convert it back into drinking water. Yeah, kind of gross, right? The other safety thing was food. So they couldn't take fresh food with them. I mean, in addition to the space and the weight, it would also spoil, right? So they actually created the freeze-dried technology.
Forgot about that.
Okay. So it also, not only did it retain its health, but it also saved a lot of space and weight. So let's cover a little bit of the comfort side. Thermometers. Okay, everybody that knows glass thermometers, remember the glass thermometers?
Mercury ones?
Mercury ones.
Yeah.
And then when mom took your temperature, you really hoped that she wasn't using the rectal one, right? So
Yeah.
also taking thermometers into space, you know, the glass ones was also kind of dangerous. So NASA actually developed the ear thermometer. And that's what one of the original models looks like, but we can go buy those today at the store, and that's where that technology came from. Another thing that was part of the comfort, believe it or not, is memory foam.
Yep.
So NASA developed memory foam. And they originally used it in 1970 on airliners, and then later the space shuttle had memory foam all over it. So a little bit of a recap. Russia started the space race with the launch of Sputnik. Innovations from ordinary people really helped NASA get a step up and try and catch up with Russia. in technology. NASA had lots of money. They had really smart people that had to think outside the box to develop new things for their use. So the impact of Neil Armstrong's quote that he did when he landed on the moon really was like throwing a stone in water. And the ripple effect has had a dramatic improvement on all of our lives with all the innovations that NASA has developed. So as in closing, I'd like to ask all of you just a kind of a short question to ponder. So if the space race never happened, where do you think our technology and society would be today?
Still communicating on chiseling stone.
Could be. So with that, that is the end of my speech, and I want to thank all of you for being here.